All right. I think we're recording now.
Yes, yeah, it's showing
Okay,
up.
Jesus. Full disclosure, we've had this conversation previously. I've been having some issues getting it to record. Once again, I'm Dan. This is Hugh. It's a continuation of our previous conversation discussing racism. Um, but we also talked on the phone right thereafter, and I think we made some good points where it's not necessarily a bad idea to have a dry run where you can maybe identify some things that, in today's America, maybe shouldn't be discussed.
Yeah, I'd rather not come. I don't think there was anything we did that was like inherently wrong, but at the same time, it's so easy for things to be misconstrued, and we're working with a sensitive topic that it deserves some respect, and I definitely don't want to inadvertently rub anything the wrong way or create, the wrong impression of who we are and what we're actually about.
I agree completely. And I think, you know, excuse me. I think we had discussed it in the previous Zoom conversation that didn't record. There are certain topics that I don't know if they come across as being very genuine or if you can be taken very seriously. Um, and we were making several jokes like, "Hi, I'm Dan, the heterosexual Caucasian male, and I'm here to talk to you about my expert opinion on menopause or childbirth, or just things that are like, really, where I don't feel as though we
And
have any
it's
serious weight in the conversation.
Yeah, and it's not a matter of being or trying to be disingenuous or anything like that. Despite the fact that we may have some mild sarcastic streaks and everything, it's still it's not what we're trying to do, or at least I hope that's not what we're trying to do. So,
No.
uh, yep.
The problem with this particular conversation that we addressed, so I apologize if between us it's repetitive, but for the 5 or 6 viewers that watch these videos, what they weren't exposed to was we recognize that there's way too many facets to the topic of racism because there's the social aspect, there's possibly even the entertainment aspect, then there's the law enforcement aspect, and probably some that we haven't even discussed. um, and one thing we had discussed that did start to make a little bit of sense is when you remove color from the spectrum. We were talking about certain mannerisms, whether it's uh, appearance, uh, personal conduct is how you carry yourself, up to and including how you talk. And we were non-discriminate as far as, white, black, brown, yellow, red. And we were using the analogy of a job interview where, one of the goals is to put your best foot forward in the hopes of attaining a job, as well as the potential strategy for, dressing and conducting yourself commensurate with the job you're attempting to get. And the part of the conversation we had where it was getting kind of awkward was when we were attempting to address certain cultural aspects where, again, we might not have the credibility or the social currency to speak about it. Does that make sense?
I think so. I think the main thing is like I don't want to speak in a way that's going to be an area that I'm really not qualified to. I can't, and neither of I know we've acknowledged this before. We don't have any ability to properly address what it is like to be black in America. We have our singular experiences, and more than anything, at least what I'm seeing from what we're doing here is we're just trying to explore that portion of this is our perspective. These are our perspectives, and
Right.
trying to unpack the rest of in terms of the greater society where that fits in, what our understanding is, and again, I would love to have any other forms of input that, while this may be two white guys talking about racism, uh, this is definitely not, these are definitely not two white guys who can't have a pleasant conversation about it. Even if stuff gets a bit awkward, that's totally fine. Like, civility. That's the whole point of all of this in the first place. And I am 150% behind the concept of someone stepping in and saying, no, that's you're talking about it the way that a white person would view it. And, all right, enlighten me. I want to hear more about it, because if we don't have the awkward conversations, how do we get to the root of anything?
So that's a great point. I may have access to people with deeper roots in faith, specifically Christianity, but that's an excellent point. And I would really appreciate if, out of the 4 or 5 people that actually take the time to watch these videos, if there is somebody, let's say non-white, so that opens it up to anything else: Asian, Hispanic, African American, Native American, Pacific Islander. I spent 6 years, in Oahu, stationed at K-Bay. I had a great time. But it would be nice to get somebody with a different perspective, because even if they have confirmation bias, even, if they tend to view white people as evil, or if they tend to be on guard when dealing with white people, if they're willing to have a civil discussion, and more importantly, open to the fact that we don't have to agree, but we can still be civil. And I frame it like that for this reason. I always tend to bring up the concept of confirmation bias. I think another way to put it is called scomaktia. And the bottom line is, when you commit to believing into something, your mind actively seeks out evidence to support that belief system. Case in point, ever since the events post-Civil War and the 20th century, where we had the Civil Rights Movement, the Civil Rights Acts, and how we have progressed since then, I do not believe in this concept or this theory or this narrative that the United States is as racist or worse as it was. More specifically, in areas where it was never known for being racist, I don't believe that there's been a resurgence in it. What I think is, there are people out there who, for whatever reasons, either have a vested interest in the social division in the United States, or people who, for whatever reason, I don't know what their reasons could be, but people who, keep throwing fuel on the fire. If the fire had ultimately reached its apex in the 60s and started to die out, and all we have are loose embers, I feel like there's people out there that keep stoking it, that keep, try to keep this flame going, where I don't think, legitimately speaking, I don't feel as though the majority of Americans feel that way. I was born in 76, and I said this in the last video. All right. The majority of athletes I admired were typically other than white. And I didn't admire them because of that. I admire them because of their prowess. So the notion that now that I'm in my 40s, I belong to a country that is equally as bigoted and segregated and whatnot as far back as the 1960s, I just have a hard time believing in that.
Well, and I think that potentially right now, just with our with the existing political climate and the increased awareness and protests, riots, everything that's been going on, focused on race, that we may be seeing things being forced to the surface a little bit more. That groups who have been sitting, especially within pockets of racist, now that they're being forced more out of the woodwork, now that there is pressure that we really aren't okay with this. For anyone who wasn't aware already, we're really not cool with the whole thing. That may be creating pressure and causing them to fight back a little bit more. And that's just actually something that we're seeing on the surface. I believe that it's been there all along. Anyone who thinks that racism completely went away, that part's nutty. From a legal standpoint, have we established, to my knowledge, equality for everyone at this point? If not, we're very close to it, across all groups of people, which is a good thing. That's how it should be. But as far as the current narrative that's going on, current social issues and that climate, I do suspect that that there is more friction being created. And yeah, even what point you're raising right there, as far as if people are in some cases being inflammatory, there's probably some element of that. We know there are elements of that through social media. That there are bots that are devoted to nothing but finding issues that are going to upset people and getting things more fired up.
You know, we had talked about a lot of different topics, none of which were recorded. So what I find bothersome is I feel like we have to repeat some of them, which
Yeah.
will be monotonous to us. Um, I had mentioned that if you want to stretch your imagination, keeping in mind our limited social currency as far as what we are socially accepted, allowed to talk about, we use the reference of a job interview. So you talk about the concept of systemic racism, where there's this overarching, almost supernatural, subliminal, racist diatribe narrative. I don't even know if I'm framing this correctly, but almost like America as a whole is just racist to its core. So if I was to attempt to, I don't know, support that in any way, shape, or form, then I would have to use the analogy of a job interview, where the main focus seems to be white on black. Because you don't seem to be hearing much of anything else from anybody else other than the black community, where it's America today in 2020, and this started a few years ago, so it's not like it just started this year. But the narrative seems to be America in the 21st century is no better off than it was pre-1960. So you go to the job interview thing we talked about, and we've had this discussion already, so let's see if we can refine it a little bit. Within certain subcultures, or just culturally speaking, period, you have some stereotypes, whether that's how you dress, so how you look, how you present yourself, and how you talk, your overall conduct, your overall presentation. And typically speaking, when you go to a job interview, you're trying to present the best of yourself. So if it's not normally how you would present yourself, then you would, clean yourself up and kind of talk like we do now. Like you and I have been making a very concerted effort to articulate our words, use proper diction, be grammatically correct. Some people might accuse us of being extremely whitewashed, but we're trying to sound in some way, shape, or form halfway intelligent so that anybody watching this can follow along. Almost like we would conduct ourselves in an interview. Yeah.
Somewhat. I can still get a lot more formal, but sure.
Of course. So in the most delicate way that I can, I think if you're attempting to lend credibility to this concept of systemic racism, and I'm going to pair it up with this. So there's that other discussion of equal opportunity, but is it really the desire for opportunity, or is it the desire for outcomes, equal outcomes? Because you have the opportunity for success, but if you don't do everything necessary for success, you cannot expect the same outcomes. And again, if certain topics are off limits due to our limited social currency, then let's keep it in our own lane. So if you're a hillbilly, if you're a redneck, if you're one of those subcultural stereotypes within the white community, if you're trailer trash, okay, and you show up to an interview and you're all trailer trashed out, you're all, hillbillied out, you're whatever fits. So for the 5 or 6 people that view this, or however many more view this, whatever fits your definition of a potential white stereotype, beyond that of like suit and tie and proper articulation and diction and formulation of sentences into paragraphs, whatever fits your stereotype of a negative white person, imagine showing up to an interview like that. Yo, what up? Name's Billy Bob. Depending on what Billy Bob is attempting to interview for, it may not go over very well.
And I know I mentioned in our previous conversation, I have seen interviews being just flatly dismissed for the simple matter of he didn't even wear a tie. He wore everything else right, but if you don't show up to a tie in any interview, you're not taking it seriously. And it is interesting because even if you're just getting, close to it, what if it turns out that the guy had a tie, but it got ruined or something that earlier that day, and there just was an opportunity to replace it. But you are absolutely the most qualified person applying for it, and yet that's still going to be enough to kill it right there.
So the point that I was trying to make with that, and your point is noted, where you're talking about the nuance. What I'm saying is, if within certain cultural norms there's a certain expectation for your appearance and your conduct, and that appearance and conduct gets you treated a certain way, is that necessarily a limitation of opportunity, or is that a limitation of outcome?
It's a fun question because a big part of me still questions, all right, are we looking this when we this ultimately we're coming down to social norms. So are you fitting within the social norm that as a company we want to put out there to the public? I mean, that's a valid concern, but beyond that, and in some cases, is it something that you're just looking for because that would be your personal preference? Are you actually objectively evaluating whether or not someone is the most qualified candidate? Like, where do we define what's normal? And I know that's a spot where within this country we get ourselves into a ton of trouble, because how many times have you seen something blow up in the news because someone decides they are going to throw a fit over people not speaking English? And this is America, speak English, you learn our language. Yeah, we don't have a language.
Yeah, we've never declared a national language.
We didn't do it, so whatever you speak is what it is. But it's it's something that comes up that as far as the predominant language in most of the country now, I mean, it is still English. Spanish is certainly rising very quickly, but do I think that it's going to change just based on that? No, I think we're still just going to be the wonderful mess that is America.
So I'll give you some examples. And because racism is not technically supposed to be centered on white versus black responding to white, so to speak, it's supposed to be all encompassing. I'm going to try to give you some examples. In our previous conversation, I spoke at length about my experiences overseas, and how without any fault of our own, as in with the intentions. The intentions was not to do wrong, and the intention was not to inadvertently adversely affect somebody due to, just having the most accurate, honest to God intelligence available. We may have inadvertently created more insurgents by having negative interactions. We didn't set out to have negative interactions. All right. Between Iraq and Afghanistan, you're dealing with brown-skinned Middle Eastern people with black hair, no uniforms. So there's no uniform, there's no team insignia, there's nothing to necessarily signify I'm on this team. So we have to try to weed out who people are, okay? Without going any further down the rabbit hole, you can start to see how complex that can be, right? So if somebody's doing something that fits the profile, okay, and from my previous profession, profiling is not a negative attribute. But if somebody's doing something that fits the profile and you yoke them up and you interrogate them and whatnot, and it turns out, no, they're absolutely nobody, you may have accidentally created an insurgent, because now that they've had a negative interaction where they've had zero interactions before, or positive interactions within their own culture, a singular negative interaction could make you an enemy for life. So we had discussed that previously, so I had to reframe that for this recorded conversation. I think part of the problems we deal with is adding intent where intent doesn't belong, is conflating the rhyme and the reason to match a narrative where it doesn't belong. And we had spoke at length about various issues. one of the issues I see is right before my mom and my kid's sister moved out here, one of the problems my mom was dealing with is my niece, my oldest niece. My mom one day had, my sister was working, my older sister. She's younger than me, but both my sisters are younger than me. But she's got a daughter, and her daughter had to be registered for school. So my mom took her to the school, and my mom was having the hardest time because there's like 11 lines for registration. 10 of them were all Spanish speaking. But my mom didn't know that. My mom was like, I'm here to register my granddaughter for school. You know, blah, 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 blah. It's like, now my mom speaks Spanish. My mom took a lot of Spanish in high school. She's fluent enough to keep up with the conversation, so on and so forth. But my mom was like, no. And it wasn't she was going out of her way to be racist, but it's like a lot of times it comes down to communication. What I've learned in my 44 years on Earth is unless things have been communicated properly, there can sometimes be a shock value that brings unintended consequences. So where now my mom could start to look like a racist and my mom might seem like a racist, my mom may have just completely been left out of the communications loop where, hey, just so you know, due to the number of Spanish speaking students who do not currently speak English, there's going to be 10 lines of all Spanish speaking. For those that require English for registration, you need to go all the way down to line 11. That might have been provided to my sister, but my sister didn't communicate to my mom. So now my mom shows up and she's like, what the French, toast?
And, you know, I think that actually the part that opens up for me and what I see from it that I think is a major concern, like in general, discussing race, even beyond just this particular forum, is that it's so easy to run that risk of something unintentionally coming across the wrong way. And it is that issue of communication and that intent, which you can't easily prove to anyone what it is, that they're just so that, you know, no one hears what I'm not saying here. There are plenty of examples of people out there who go out and make complete asses of themselves, and their intent is clear, or they had something subconscious, or they have had feelings before, and it rears its ugly head, and they are showing their true colors. And that's reprehensible. That I will not defend in the least. But for people who find themselves in an unfamiliar situation with the one you described, where it may just be stemming from a frustration that, damn it, I got in the wrong line. Like it's something that I didn't want to have to go through because it's an inconvenience. But now it ends up looking much closer to a situation where it's, hi, speak English. It gets into that same space very quickly. And I think trying to be understanding that, and I think that's something that really we have a lot of growing to do in this country, is to try to be understanding that we have so many cultures in the same place. It's not a melting bowl, melting pot. I hope everyone has gotten past that belief, and that we are going to have different cultures, different languages, and it's all going to be in one place like it has been. And we need to make our peace with it a lot more than we have.
You know, if I may insert a joke there, right? First and foremost, we reached a point where we're like, okay, we need to start watching the flow of people into our country because, you know, we're starting to get full. But if you go back to like the Statue of Liberty, right? Give me your poor and your meek and your whatever. Did anybody ever ask the Native Americans? I mean, I'm imagining some Native American looking at that statue going, like, there's not enough of you motherfuckers here already? Seriously? I mean, my tribe is from New York, but now I got to live in Oklahoma. There's not enough of you fuckers here already?
Of course. You know, I mean, hey, we bought Manhattan fair and square for $20, okay? with a
Yeah.
treaty that people couldn't read or understand. That's
See,
awesome. That's
but it goes back to a greater point, though. Getting back on track.
yeah.
I think a lot of people are attempting to associate true, old school racism and bigotry where there just isn't any. It's confusion, it's inconvenience, it's frustration, you know. And to my mom's credit and anybody else who's had to deal with that sort of thing, sometimes a little communication can go a long way. Hey, look, we've had a recent surge in immigration of children and families of all ages, where at every age group, at every class level, we have a significant population of people who don't speak English yet. They just don't speak it yet. Okay. Because I think what happened in the days past when you and I were much younger is English was so standard, and it became like the custom. It became the expectation. So now what happens is, whether it was communicated or not, I sincerely don't know. But what happens is, like, and you had mentioned it, is when you're caught off guard, when it's unexpected, when the shock value is tremendous. I imagine my mom was utterly just blown away, because the last time she probably ever dealt with school registration was my sister's. And I think even then it had reached a point where they had set aside 1, 2, or 3 lines for Spanish speaking, where the majority was English speaking. And I think what overwhelmed my mom was that there was 11 lines, but only 1 was English speaking. And I think that's where she was like she felt like she was in the Twilight Zone. Like, I'm just outside, I'm in a suburb just outside of Chicago. When did this happen?
And that, so this was something that we also touched on a little bit in the previous attempt at this, that there's at least some element of, I suppose, how people adapt to that over time, that with all of the changes that we've seen specifically within the second half of the 20th century going into the 21st century, that these changes have happened so fast that, I mean, even as it goes right now, there are things that are changing within the space of several weeks. Sometimes it feels like, where you want to make sure that you are aware of what's going on, and it can be more than you can than a reasonable person is usually going to be able to take on, even if they aren't trying to offend anyone, and even if they're trying to be sensitive to the needs and expectations of other people they interact with. That you're looking at usually a solid generation up to around 2 before you will really see the adoption of new cultural norms, and to have someone within their lifetime have things change dramatically, so that something that you're used to is no longer the norm. Be that good, bad, and different. It is what it is, and it will still, well, how many people have had the experience of, sorry, granddad says that sometimes he's old, like that kind of thing will come up, and that it's not saying it makes it right. It's acknowledging more of,
That was his world.
It was his world, and he may not completely adapt to it. He's going to be on his way out.
Right.
And this is the world that we have. We have the world that we're given, and we're adapting into it. And it's an effort that we have to make at all times. So I think that part can be, I think that should absolutely be closely considered as well.
Well, this topic probably cannot reach some sort of conclusion in 1 or 2, which, for those who weren't part of the non-recorded call, that was said numerous times. And this is why: because of the tremendous amount of nuance. Even if we steer clear of areas where our social currency has limited value, so we got to steer clear of it, there's still too many things to unpack. And even this topic, where we start talking more about the Spanish speaking and whatnot, that's completely different from what we had previously discussed. That being said, again, it's the over conflation, it's the excessive attribution to, my mom's not racist, but she was completely caught off guard, and it was frustrating, and she had to adapt to it. but automatically somebody who's belligerently hypersensitive will conflate that to racism. And I'm going to make an analogy here, and I'm well aware of its flaws and its imperfections. One thing about the military, good, bad, or indifferent, leaders are not elected. They are selected based on their previous performance, and they're promoted based on their potential. So like all of our general officers who make the grandest scale of decisions, again, they're selected to the next rank based on their potential. Everybody in the military is promoted based on their potential. And once they're promoted, they basically have the ultimate say-so within their purview, okay, with whatever they can control. They have the ultimate say-so. It is not a democracy. Some people could call it tyranny. They could call it a fascist dictatorship, but it is what it is. But these leaders have to weigh the consequences. They have to weigh the information, and they have to commit to a decision. You could try to make that equation to elected leaders. The major difference is elected leaders are always cognizant of their popularity because they are elected, which means they have to win the popular vote. With the exception of the presidency, and I've already made a video on the Electoral College, elected leaders are elected by a popular vote. So they're always basing their decisions on how it's going to impact their voter base, which I said all that because I think a lot of their decisions are based on those who are extremely hypersensitive, and their decisions are based on getting reelected, and those decisions are never gradual. I think, and I've said it numerous times, it's your favorite thing to hear, we don't do anything in moderation. And our elected officials are the greatest example of this. The vast majority of them, when they respond specifically to a population that has the loudest voice, they go full retard. And you were waiting for it.
Yep. I knew it was coming.
They go full retard, and the response is not proportionate. And I think COVID is a great example, but COVID is not in the topic or the realm of racism. And here's why I brought up elected leaders. It's because elected leaders are the ones who influence and dictate policy as it pertains to law enforcement, who then have to go out and enforce the laws, which means the individual law enforcement officer, he or she sits in a brief before the beginning of their shift, and they receive instructions on what sort of things to be on the lookout for, what areas to hit up the hardest, what areas to patrol, all these different things. I mean, there's so many different things I could go into. And I only know this because of how many reservists I worked with in the Columbus area that were law enforcement officers. So it's not like John or Jane Smith, law enforcement officer who just coincidentally happens to be white, goes, clocks in, and is like, all right, let's go to the black neighborhood, or let's go to the brown neighborhood, and let's be as white, fascist, dickish, douchebag, fat, some other adjectives that I'm missing out on. Let's do everything we can do to, just rile up the BLM movement. And that doesn't happen. That's never the case. They go specifically where they're told to go, or they go where they're called to. And we had this conversation previously. They go where the crime is.
I think. I actually was digging up. I was digging some things up a little bit because, as came up, most of the way through our last conversation, I decided, you know what, I have another resource here. I can pull up another monitor and pull up information. So I started digging a little bit just to put some numbers onto this. And when we've talked about especially elements of systemic racism, and how can the numbers be as different as they are? That's where it gets very interesting. And I'll have to look into seeing if, I know Zoom I can do screen sharing, but it's not the smoothest way.
When I tried to do the projector thing?
Well, it would be similar to that, but it would be like directly showing my screen. So we can possibly work with that at some point, but I need to take over another part. So anyways, so what I was pulling up, and this is just to show where the source is coming from. This was from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. So this is scholarly work here uh, from an academic publication, and the statistic that I'm looking at specifically, this is the lifetime risk of being killed by police per 100,000, and the graph is mind blowing. So number one, and this part I don't think is going to surprise anyone. You are probably, if you're going to get killed by police, you're probably a man. Men are idiots. I kind of get that. That's a self acknowledgement that especially between the I think the ages are especially
Women
between
are
like
crazy.
20 and 35. They can be crazy. Men are crazy dangerous sometimes.
No,
And they're
women
idiots.
are crazy. We're stupid.
Agreed. That's a safe assessment. So
Because
yes,
a crazy woman can get us to do some really, really stupid stuff.
yeah, yes, yeah. That's boy. That's
Helen
another
of
topic.
Troy.
Yeah, that did not go well.
No.
So, yeah, when we look at lifetime risks of being killed by police per 100,000 African Americans, we get these staggering looking numbers where we're looking at somewhere around 100 per 100,000. So it's about a 1 in 1,000 chance. If you're black and you live in the U.S., 1 in 1,000, you're probably gonna get killed by police at some point. Um, and then that drops off massively. That we end up with a number that's somewhere more around. It's 30 something percent. I'm looking at a graph, so I don't have the exact numbers right here. 30 out of 100,000 if you're white. That means everything's inverted big
Yeah.
times between the actual representative population and what we see in practice. And that same reflection comes up then if you're looking at incarceration rates. We see a similar inversion that it goes beyond what I think anyone can reasonably say is due to, oh, this is a cultural thing. That's the only thing driving it. I don't know. There could be some elements of policy. I think that what people look for too often, I know I mentioned my sociology class before.
I've taken sociology as well.
Yeah, and this was one of the big things that my professor always came back to was that there are no silver bullets. Like you're never gonna find it, and that people just out of their drive for feeling better about the world and wanting to have control over their environment, they're always seeking those. They want things to be simple.
Yeah.
And that's a natural human drive, but it's not how the world works.
So, as it would pertain to either racism, systemic racism, combination of the two, this is where it gets terribly difficult because, again, if we acknowledge our social currency or a lack thereof, it's very difficult to talk about. And I'm trying to find the most neutral way to present it. Within the white community, you could probably argue that there are certain stereotypes. Let's go as far as to say within the highest known criminal element of the white community. All right. And, I'm going to generalize this, but it's a horrific way to conduct business, but I'm going to generalize it. Whether it's your white trash, your bikers, whatever you want to say within the white community, if there is something that you could point out to as in, yep, not surprised whatsoever, that fits the stereotypical mold, that makes sense. The problem you have with the statistics and the demographics is, yes, numerically speaking, there's a much larger population of white people in America. I think it's estimated we're pushing like 300 million people in the United States.
I think it's closer to 350, but that's fine.
Yeah, where white people are probably going to make up a larger portion of that. Statistically, I would say.
Right.
So if our negative valued stereotypes represent a much, much lower statistical value of the greater white population, they're 100% of that stereotype. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Within that stereotype, there are others that might like that. There are others who might seek to emulate that. And the greatest example I'll give you is how many guys after Sons of Anarchy have attempted to emulate in any way, shape, or form that whole Sons of Anarchy thing. They're not 1%. They're not 1% bikers. They're not true outlaw bikers, but they're attempting to emulate that. And because they do that, how many of them have had some awkward interactions with the police because they're attempting to portray themselves as one of those 1% biker clubs when in effect they are not?
Those are number, man, I would love to see. I know there's probably no way that we would easily ever be able to get numbers like this to even be counted, but like if we could have something that broke it down, like, you know, number of police interactions or violent encounters with police, and it's breaking it down in terms of like it actually says like hillbilly, like
Right.
white trash. Like if we could see it that way, it would be a fascinating view, and I guarantee everyone will shoot that down because they're gonna, well, you're applying labels onto it, and these are labels. It, about the closest area we're ever going to have to applying um, any derogatory labels of race are going to be towards the white race, just because we at least have some space to do so. And it doesn't make applying derogatory labels any better of a practice, but it exist. There's a picture that you have in your head when you hear these things. That's how the brain works. Again, that's for how I view it. There are parts of just human psychology. We have to understand how our brains work, and that can be flawed sometimes. We don't have our brains are not the best sources for processing information.
You had mentioned in your phone call that when the Africans were brought here as slaves and they were basically stripped of their original African culture. So whatever culture exists within the black community now is either something they've created themselves or they've borrowed from us, in which case true African culture might only exist within legitimate immigrated Africans from Africa.
There are still definitely elements left over, predominantly from West African culture, that came uh, through people who were brought in through the slave trade, and those actually do still persist. And in fact, those are portions that do have a major impact on social interactions. Specifically, if we're looking at so this was
I
something
got
that
to tell
was
you, I love the scholastic side of you, but you're going in a completely different direction than I'm intending to.
okay. Well,
And I didn't mean to cut
I'll
you
go
off
with
like that. I just,
no. Yeah. It'll come in there. These are just examples I end up with.
but I
Um,
get it because like when you're so filled with information, it's like, oh, I'm so glad you mentioned that because I got a space in my brain for that.
this is
I
this is
get
why
that.
we don't end up with these. That This is our second attempt at the same thing. This is a wildly different conversation. You will get something different every time with me.
Yes.
But uh, but what it comes down to is that so within typical portions of Western African society, you will find that if there's an accusation made of guilt, the way that you deal with that is very different from how you would see that within Western Europe. It's going to be about declaring more loudly that you are not guilty. And these are things that, if you're looking at this as someone of Western European descent and coming from that culture, that looks real questionable. Like, guilty dog barks the loudest. Well, that actually isn't necessarily the case when coming from that particular background. And that's just one small example of it. But it is a situation where portions of Western African culture still exist within Black culture. People descended predominantly from slaves, and that it does shape parts of that culture. So it's not that that they were stripped of their culture. It's that culture was certainly not encouraged. It did have to go underground in many ways, but there are remnants left of it. There are parts that certainly were
Right.
influenced more by the people that they were around, amongst either the general population or slave owners, whoever they may be. But it was that other predominant portion of culture. You get that
Right.
intermingling,
I'm
and
tracking.
you get what we have.
The point that I was trying to make though is, and I'll go back to our own skin color. If within the white population, there are certain attributes within a certain element, we'll call a criminal element, that have become desirable within a portion of the community, then it's entirely possible they may have had some unintended interactions with law enforcement because they're attempting to emulate a particular criminal element. And this is where I'm trying to tread lightly, because if from a cultural perspective, there's, culturally speaking, an element that you wish to emulate, and that element may or may not be completely within the confines of the law, but from a cultural standpoint, that has become the emulatable norm, if you're with me so far.
Mm-hmm.
Case in point, within the black community, just by themselves, they attack each other like it's not even cool. Like, oh, you're not black. You should have your black card revoked or whatever. And I find that fascinating, where we don't do that in the white community. We don't revoke our white cards, okay? But within the black community, they do it to themselves. And within the black community, they may have created a culture of their own of emulatable behavior, where, you see what I'm saying here?
Mm-hmm.
So if you translate that into law enforcement, right? And I'm using my military experience and the interactions I've had with people from law enforcement. If the criminal element is a duck, walks like a duck, talks like a duck, acts like a duck, therefore it's a duck, but that behavior has become emulatable by the law-abiding citizens, up to and include the point where maybe in order to emulate it to the fullest, I also have to break the law. That can set a very dangerous precedence just for that overall culture, period, up to and include if it's becoming more culturally acceptable to challenge and resist law enforcement versus, I understand, perhaps maybe I fit a profile. How can we get through this interaction positively so that I can go about my business, officer? Well, I'm so glad you approached it that way. I do apologize, this, that, or the other, blah, blah, blah. Can you explain this? Can you explain that? Okay, fair enough. You have yourself a good day. Be safe. But instead, we're seeing more and more where, even body cam footage or whatnot, there's resistance. And then people are trying to defend that. Like, what was it, Atlanta, where the guy's at Wendy's and he gets shot because he stole a taser? Most people who are law-abiding citizens willing to go about their day are not going to steal an officer of the law's taser and then attempt to use it on him. But you see, this is where these rabbit holes, it's a perpetual minefield. So, in attempting to understand certain things, in attempting to understand the context that some people are framing everything in, if within a certain culture, certain conduct, certain behavior, certain appearance has become acceptable, but there's little to no separation between law-abiding and non-law-abiding, that makes it terribly difficult. If the entire white population decided to all of a sudden start emulating that small subculture of white people who break the law, mafia, biker gangs, I don't know, just, whatever stereotype exists within white criminal elements, okay, it would be tremendously difficult for law enforcement to separate whether or not we're law-abiding or non-law-abiding. And I think that's the most neutral way I can frame this without sounding like a dick.
Well, and I think that what you are ultimately highlighting here is this is exactly why profiling can create so much in the way of problems in the first place. And something that this is probably going to be enough of a rabbit hole right here that it would be a good potential topic for another day. That I know a lot of what you're drawing upon is your military experience, and that we have different. We're talking about war zones versus being in your country of origin, where you live, and having certainly different rules. A really interesting point that was coming up based on that is how much more strict overall rules of engagement are for the military than they are for police. and it's an interesting topic. I know that you've talked about that with me a little bit in the past, about differences, especially when you get into things like UN involvement and changes to specific rules, and how that can impact the way everything is conducted on the ground. But that we are at the same time looking at different rules when we talk about things. And yeah, I realize I just went a little bit into the rabbit hole now, but just to touch on it briefly, one interesting point that I was coming across is that for as much of a push as there is towards the demilitarization of police, there may actually be some merit in increasing their training more in a militaristic direction, just so that they're being held to a higher standard when they're looking at things such as escalation of force, rather than having very little training and how that would actually go forward.
Well, there's pros and cons to come from all of that, and we once had a conversation where I found it funny. So like our most specialized operators like SEAL teams, Green Berets, MARSOC, Force Recon, Delta, these are the guys that are forming their own companies and teaching law enforcement how to like shoot, but like shoot with maximum effectiveness, and maximum protection. And then vice versa. We've got law enforcement, forming, prior law enforcement forming companies to contract with the military to teach them how to play nicey nice with civilians, because normally speaking, we are not the surgical tool. We are the blunt force hammer. So, granted, you're right. That's a totally different rabbit hole. But, you're talking about circumstances where, again, conflation, excessive attribution to intent. Law enforcement is literally dealing in a war zone, and you want to make the comparison to the military. The smallest military unit that would ever operate is a fire team, and I can only speak to the Marine Corps. Okay, so as a former Marine, the smallest combative unit is a fire team. If you want to go deeper than that, then technically a sniper team is a two-man team, a shooter and a spotter. We haven't operated like that in years. Both of my experiences, Iraq, Afghanistan, we didn't go outside the wire with anything smaller than a squad, as in 10 or more. Like just because of the rules, not the rules of engagement, but because of the method of engagement, responding proportionately. We had to go outside the wire with a squad because it takes at least a fire team to treat a wounded service member. That means there's nobody else returning fire, covering fire, etc. So think about all that I just said. Now you're sending cops, like one or two, into neighborhoods that are all-out war zones, and then you're accusing them of inappropriate conduct. You're accusing them of being racists and bigots and whatnot. We have cops being ambushed, and at the most, they go out as a pair, okay? I couldn't imagine being a cop today. So, you talk about this racism. Here's what blows my mind. We never talk about the white communities where there's white outlaws, all right? Whether it's the trailer parks, and I know I'm being very stereotypical, but there are communities within the white culture that birds of a feather flock together, and they're outlaw, they're whatever, the white ghetto, if you will. But you never hear about them. You never talk about them because it's like, well, they're white, so who cares? We're only focusing on black, and then maybe we'll talk about brown. If the wall is a popular topic, then we'll talk about brown. But right now, the major focus is black. And, we're not going to talk about Asians or anybody else. We're just going to talk about black. And that's what fascinates me is at some point, somebody's got to be driving this bus. Somebody has a goal. And I mentioned this before. I'm not all QAnon. But, even a broken clock is right twice a day. And it really makes you wonder who's driving this, because what is the ultimate goal? Is the ultimate goal to create such division where it's literally on a daily basis, black versus white? Or is the ultimate goal to reach a climax where we have a secondary civil war? In which case, what is the goal of that civil war? Either the blacks purge the whites or the whites purge the blacks. And then from there, if you're not black and you're not white, do you have to then fight for the loyalty of the non-whites? It's absurd. I don't deny what happened, in the 1960s and prior. And I don't deny that it was rough coming out of the 1960s. But I don't think in the 21st century it is anything like that. If you want to talk about racial equality, where is the historical white-only university in 2020, where only whites can attend in 2020?
You're not going to find any that are left, but you're still going to find. So this is where you're still going to find traces of. This is where when I say that we're looking on the order of generations for things to still improve, that you'll still be able to find without any trouble universities and other institutions that are still going to be predominantly white. There may, while there are rules in place that say, well, you can't discriminate based off of that, it's still not extremely far from it. That there certainly can still be some exclusivity. I don't have numbers in front of me, but it's one of those things where it just wouldn't surprise me for it to still be the case. And it's not that it's legal, it's that people are able to find other things.
Yeah.
Similar to when we're talking about the job interviews, you can find some sort of reason to say, yeah, but you know what? This other candidate, I think they're going to bring this part of their background. They've got a few other things that they bring to the school that would be beneficial, whether it's conscious or subconscious. And that's where the subconscious bias portion comes from, that being aware of what you're not aware of. I think it's more about being cognizant of things that could be going on in your head and things that could be influencing your decision making, which I'm never going to complain about things that encourage people to enhance their objectivity.
And I think if we're being fair and honest, because again, we admit the fact that this can't be concluded in 1 or 2 hours. There's too many facets of it. I think the narrative today is more so black and white versus anybody else in white. I think the next group to be included tends to be brown, the Hispanic Latino population, but there's no Latino lives matter, so on and so forth. But if we go back to that job interview where you're basing your decision on how to treat someone based on how they present and conduct themselves, and conduct, in my opinion, is not just body language, but your speech and whatnot. And I do apologize if this sounds extremely douchey or extremely whitewashed, but it just is what it is. I'm just trying to make an example here. You take a white candidate, comes in, suit and tie, articulate, diction, etc. Okay, roger that. Put them off to the side in the maybes. You take a white candidate, comes in, fulfilling a stereotype, not wearing a suit and tie, not presenting himself eloquently or herself eloquently, more than likely going to go in the no pile. And I say you could go down the list: black, brown. You could get a little more sensitive. Well, what if a Native American comes in wearing traditional Native American garb, but it's extremely formal Native American garb, but not a suit and tie? Ooh, sensitive area. Don't know how to treat that. And that's fair. And, that rabbit hole could exist for other cultures. I'm not originally from America. This is the formal dress of where I'm from. Oh, okay. Well, forgive me if it's a little shocking at first, but let's carry on with the interview. And I think from then it all becomes about the conduct, where if the appearance is not necessarily matched, does that make sense?
Yeah, it's tracking.
But again, they're still making an effort. This is the formal attire of my heritage and my culture. I'm not attempting to go out of my way to do anything. Just, this is all I had. I didn't have the time and the opportunity to go do this because, well, I kind of need the job I'm interviewing for. I would have had
I think this is going to come right back to the same thing we come back to all the time, that thanks to America not really wanting to set a whole lot of standards, especially early on, that as a result, we're able to say, like, I don't think it would actually be that difficult uh, to actually establish, based off of everything that we observe around us, you know, what are the predominant cultural norms and cultural forms of typical conduct, saying, hey, this is basically how we do things. A lot of other countries in the world do that directly, and they're not subtle
Yeah.
about it. It's, you're going to talk like us, you're going to act like us, and we don't have that here, and I don't believe we're ever going to have it here. But
Right.
that's I think going to be a major challenge for us always, that we can try to expand what we're aware of, but without having some definitions of, this is at least typical. This is safe. This is what everyone has some awareness of, or we can say with relative certainty that, you know, maybe it's 95% of people will be used to it. As long as you're not like directly oppressing anyone, then it seems harder to say that it's bad. And I
Right.
worry that I'm like right on the edge of, as I'm saying this, of it sounding like, oh yes, I'm about to push that whole like uh white European, Western chauvinism kind of perspective out there. And you know it's not so much of saying, oh yes, it's clearly superior. Don't get me wrong. Do I love Western society? Yes. It's a great way for things to go, at least in my experience and from my perspective. But am I saying that like everything else is absolute garbage and we don't need to understand how that fits in with the rest of society? No. But it it's definitely creating a much greater challenge uh, to ever feeling like we just have one society. I hope that eventually we do. I don't know what scale of like centuries we're talking about to get there, though.
Yeah, I go back to my previous statement. I think in the 21st century, the year 2020, I don't think we are I don't think we are worse off or just as we were in the 1960s and previously, following the Civil War and the collapse of the Confederacy. I think we are extremely progressive in the right direction. I think there's I think there's a small group of people that are pushing a narrative that's becoming extremely popular, but it's dangerously popular. Um, I said in the previous unrecorded version of this, I don't support Black Lives Matter because, in conjunction with the concept of Newton's third law, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. If you're placing precedence on Black lives, you have to remove value from somewhere, whether that's removing value from the lives of the officers or removing value from some other skin color, since pigmentation seems to be the primary target here. Um, Newton's third law demands that if you're going to add value, you have to remove it from somewhere else. Um, we don't
And
have to agree on that, but
yeah, I think that
I'm
so
steadfast in that.
the
I'm going to die on that belief.
the part where I'm going to definitely go against that is that, at least from everything that I understand within BLM and what it's really addressing, it isn't so much that it's about detracting in any way from other groups, so much as at its core raising awareness of a social problem.
So then I would fight back with this. If you believe, I'll argue back. Fight's such a harsh
Now
word.
fight me, come on.
Um, I would respond with this. If you or somebody else believes that there is excessive policing of the Black community, if you can remove racism as the intention, because not all cops are white. This isn't the segregated South. If you can remove racism as a possibility for it, why else would there be such a large presence of law enforcement in Black communities, and why would there be so many more interactions within the Black community? It sounds harsh, and I realize, being a white male, I may not have the social uh, equity, the social credibility to discuss it. But then if we use white people as an example, if it's a trailer park filled with white people and over 50% of the people in that trailer park are breaking the law, and law enforcement is always in the trailer park, we get it. We understand why. You got a 50-50 chance. It's either heads or it's tails.
And yet,
but we don't talk about it. We don't talk about the trailer parks.
And I believe that the only reason that we aren't talking about that is because the numbers don't end up looking like anything.
Exactly.
It's where you can still end up, it's at least what the suspicion is. And, based off of all of the numbers. And again, this is where it gets a little bit more challenging is, especially if we're trying to piece out what are the actual causes, causation, correlation.
Yes.
That's always a big dangerous point. And while people are still getting killed in large numbers, it sucks to have to do this. In fact, this is a lot like, there was a previous call that we did a while back where we were talking about COVID, and something that I was coming back onto is that in the world of science, in the scientific community, moving targets are fine. That's normal. But people want what everyone wants in the rest of society, because we can't expect everyone to have that background or that comfort level with shaping their views and allowing things to evolve. That it's okay. We're still working on. We have this study that showed us there's something anomalous. So now we're going to do another study to find out, can we tease this variable out of it and find out if there is an actual link. And that takes on the order generally of years to get there. And so we're stuck with people going around and conjecturing everything they can. We get people coming out with opinions all over the place, and they don't necessarily have a definite grounding in reality. That it may sound nice and it'll play beautifully into confirmation bias, and then we don't get into the right places. But if we're coming back to the whole issue of why you're not hearing about it for your meth-ridden trailer parks, it's that for some reason, being at least as much of a criminal, you're probably still not going to get shot. And a lot of that may even have to do with how you conduct yourself when the police show up. And the fact that if you're armed to the teeth, there's still a better chance you're not going to get killed anyways. And it may be some of that subconscious part when we get back to profiling again.
Yeah.
How much of that is playing into, I'm trying to remember if it was recorded or not when we were talking about the effects of adrenaline and how much that will cloud everything. You're not thinking at that point unless you have a incredible amount of training and familiarity with the effects that it'll have on that flight and fight response. That
you hit on one thing right there, where if you want to base it on statistics, regardless of stereotypes, is a lot of times when law enforcement is called in to deal with, let's just say, white people, there are other variables and other factors which may contribute to their survivability, like being under the influence, as in under the influence to the point where they're easily subdued or more easier to work with in a non-lethal aspect. Which, again, that has nothing to do with race. It just has everything to do with pointing out facts. What I don't like is when people attribute that to race, because, that becomes racist in itself. Well, white people are all hooked on meth. And it's like, I'd much rather save that for a different conversation.
I was generalizing a little bit.
The correlation I was attempting to make was, if you get back to the theory of the duck, looks like a duck, walks like a duck, talks like a duck. And this, again, I'll throw in another analogy, chicken or the egg, which came first? So if the criminal element is borrowing certain cultural norms, appearances, mannerisms, speech patterns, then that, let's say just from a law enforcement standard, that can be problematic, because, again, if this is what the criminal element is known for, then I don't know which one's not the criminal element per se, because if the non-criminal element and the criminal element all dress the same, all talk the same, all act the same, you know, they all look the same, then it's very difficult to tell them apart. And that has nothing to do with race at all. That transcends all ethnicities. I think the problem becomes a numerical standpoint. When, if you put it in terms of ethnicity, if the criminal entities within the Caucasian community represent this, but the number of Caucasians, you know, if that represents 10% of the Caucasian community, that's only 10%. If within other communities, African American community or the Latino community or whatever the case may be, if those particular elements represent a much higher percentage, that's not racism, that's just confusion. You know, who am I looking for in Iraq or Afghanistan? You're looking for a brown-skinned, black-haired, military-age male. That's literally the entire population of Afghanistan or Iraq, minus the females. That's literally the entire population. Brown skin, black hair. Let me guess. Don't tell me. Wear sandals. May not be wearing blue jeans because it's not popular over there. Son of a bitch. That's the entire population. So I look at it pragmatically. That's not racism. If the criminal element matches the non-criminal element, or if the non-criminal element is emulating the criminal element, from a law enforcement perspective, you're stuck with the whole, I'm looking for a duck. It's going to walk like a duck. It's going to talk like a duck. It's going to dress like a duck. It's going to act like a duck. I'm looking for a duck. Well, how do you know if it's the duck you want? Well, I have to have an interaction with it. Then how do you know? I know based on how the interaction goes. What if they're violent, confrontational, if they're confrontational and physically violent towards you to the point of assaulting you? Well, in that case, they just became the duck I'm looking for. Notice there's no ethnicity involved there, because that can happen to literally anybody. You can be the whitest Karen from the most gated community and have a negative interaction with law enforcement where you then put yourself in a position to be arrested, or the attempt to arrest you is made. And who knows, Karen could have some training. Karen could make it very difficult. But we're never going to hear white cop shoots Karen.
It's
that narrative that bothers me.
Okay. Yeah. And that's now something that I have definitely seen some things out of from people, is where they are working from these statistics and trying to say they're looking for other things. If you pull up like FBI crime statistics, this is where it gets to be the like very raw, unfiltered data. And if you lack the specific training to deal with multivariate statistics, you can try to find stupid stuff all day long. I had a statistics class where my professor really liked to be a bastard, and he was giving us data sets where I was given the specific goal of proving there is no link between smoking and cancer. Guess what? I can do it. And
yeah.
And the thing is, we have to count on at least in cases of statistical analysis, especially with sensitive issues, or ultimately, I hope, just about any issue, that we're leaning more towards people doing their jobs properly, and that it will be based off of consensus. So if someone tries to publish something and it doesn't make sense, they'll be called out, and the academic world will hate them, and it takes care of itself. But the point that I was really going to come back to on this is that there are people who get hung up on portions of the numbers that don't actually mean what they think it means. So if you look at if these are just shooting related, if we're looking at homicides based on race, then are you going to end up finding that in almost all cases, white people kill white people, black people kill black people, and it's nothing. That's the community you live within. Those are the people that you're around. These are people that you probably know, because you're usually not going around killing random people. And it doesn't have a reflection on the rest of the argument, that then when we're pulling it in from a law enforcement perspective, it's a whole different can of worms.
See, and I personally am saying I don't think racism has much to do with anything. What I think it is people are cherry picking the data and framing it to fit a narrative. So if you're somebody who wants to believe racism is just as bad as it was in the southern states during the 1960s and beyond, keeping in mind that I live in a southern state, then you can find a way. All right, I'm sure we took a couple of psychology classes in college too. You can find a way to frame the information to suit your narrative. And the exact same argument could be made, because you have to be fair, balanced, and equal. The exact same argument can be made where you could also frame it to suit a different narrative. And somebody could argue that's exactly what I'm doing. The only thing I have to say about that is Ben Shapiro has this thing where he says facts don't care about your feelings. And I think that's wonderfully accurate. And we should probably close this out before it gets a little too far-fetched, and we can pick this up again later. You just tell me when you're available. So I lost my train of thought there. BLM, blah, blah, blah. We're talking about numbers. Okay, hang on a second, because I was trying to find a way to close this.
You got up to facts don't care about your feelings.
Yeah. Well, I forgot where I was going to go with that, because like I said, I don't believe that the racism is like it was. I believe that there are people out there who feel as though there's some achievable goal by stoking those flames of the past, because the vast majority of us within our age bracket or younger never truly experienced it. All right. I wasn't alive during the legit segregation and bigotry that took place in the former Confederate States in the 60s and earlier. Okay. I'm post that. So I have no idea what that's like. And I think people who are claiming that that the United States is still like that are tremendously ignorant. So they're finding data to support that. And to kind of add some context to this, I grew up low income. I think conduct may have separated me from stereotypical labels, but I grew up low income. To this day, the neighborhood where my former, I can't call it my childhood house because I moved there midway through 8th grade, but the house I lived in for half of 8th grade and all through high school is in a lower income neighborhood that is almost predominantly Hispanic by now. That's just the demographic observation. But it's a lower income neighborhood because it's an older neighborhood of the town I graduated high school in. And most of the people I knew growing up from 8th grade and high school were lower income. And some people got into things that were outside the law. One particular friend got involved with a local Chicago street gang, and he got me involved. Now, he went as far as to become initiated and a full-fledged member of the gang, where I did not get the initiation, so I was only an associate of the gang. That association has gotten me permanently banned from the North Carolina State Troopers. More importantly, that has gotten me banned from North Carolina law enforcement, was that minimal involvement with that Chicago street gang. Now, I've had a top secret security clearance in the military and everything, but that minimal involvement with a known criminal entity has gotten me banned. So just because I can speak this way now, it didn't happen overnight. You know, in the last video I did, I told you about my instructor duty, where my team leader was very adamant about how we taught information, our speech patterns and everything, because if you speak like we are now, essentially everybody can understand you. Where I may not speak Cajun, I may not speak Bostonian, I may not speak anything else, all right? But everybody who can speak a different form of dialect understands the English we're speaking. And ever since I was stationed there, this has become my normal speech pattern. It wasn't like that before. So some of these things I say, I've come to find out some people have a hard time taking me serious, because the way I conduct myself now is nothing like what I used to be back then, which what they don't realize is the greatest compliment they could ever pay me. The fact that I overcame that and I've risen beyond that. You know, the military was probably one of the best things I ever did. It helped elevate my situation. But that was an opportunity that was provided for me that I took advantage of. All right. I wasn't just given an equal outcome. And that's what drives me nuts with all this racism talk and this white privilege. It's like, you know, because I was born white, I'm instantly part of some privileged society where, you know, we have secret meetings and we pass out checks and whatnot. And it's like, I must have missed the meetings. I must not be in the email chain or whatnot, because I don't remember having any white privilege in Iraq. I don't remember having any white privilege in Afghanistan. You know, I don't remember sitting there looking at an IED going, hang on, let me go get the darkies because you can't blow up the white guys. Okay. I don't remember the IEDs having discriminatory blast radiuses and discriminatory shrapnel, where the shrapnel was like a heat-seeking missile. I'm looking for POCs. I can't kill them white boys. You know, same thing with the bullets. All right. It's not like that 1984 movie with Tom Selleck and Gene Simmons, Runaway, the heat-seeking bullets. Yeah. So that's why these conversations drive me nuts, because from those experiences I've had prior to the military and during the military, I'm just sitting here like, what the hell are you talking about? Well, you don't understand. There's a system out there that keeps me down. Really?
So I'm going to say, I think an interesting point that we're not going to be able to prove one way or the other on this, from everything we've gone through on this particular conversation, is how much of it is just a culture and conduct issue. If there is a way to actually whittle it down of how you behave, and whether or not I'm not even trying to judge whether or not that's a good or bad thing, but how much does that actually affect outcomes for everything? You'd think that, I mean, it's kind of that whole outward portion of how important attitude is towards everything you do.
So what I'd like to do, if we can, let's do another video where we can point out legitimate examples of racism regardless. All right. I don't want to make it one-sided where it's everybody against white, but let's talk about some legitimate modern day examples of racism in a third video, and then let's cap the topic off. And I'm going to love this one, and I hope you can really wrap your mind around it. Let's do a fourth video dedicated to literally fucking white people. Because I'm telling you, man, I think there's a category for where you can just go, yeah, you ain't going to catch anybody but a white person doing that.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, as a quick example, hey, here's a piece of wood. I'm going to strap it to my feet. I'm going to go up that snow-covered mountain. Oh, shit, I'm falling 30,000 feet. You're not going to find many other people other than a white person doing that. I think stereotypically speaking, there is a definite category for the possibility of fucking white people.
Absolutely. And I don't know. Is that going to end up offending anyone? We're not creating exclusive areas where you can't do something as dumb as we can't. Is that bad?
Humor, comedy, those particular areas are not supposed to have confines. They're not supposed to have boundaries. And I think in the realm of social currency, we should be able to, spend as much as we want by picking on our own ethnicity.
I mean, you're never going to have too much trouble with me wanting to make fun of things.
Only white people can sit in the stands or at home for hours at a time watching cars make left turns.
Yep, gotta have that NASCAR reference right there.
Can you believe a left turn?
Can you believe that golf was invented by a white man?
Gentlemen only, ladies forbidden. Yeah. And people love that sport. Why don't you just call it hiking with beer?
Yeah, we can probably have some fun with that.
Leave it to white people. Hiking's not good enough. Let's hit a ball. And to give you hope, we're going to put a little flag out there.
There's a little flag, but you know what? We'll let you bring a kid around to carry the heavy stuff, and that way you can drink more.
Is that a kid of color? Why is it some kid of color carrying the white man's bag? Racism!
Oh, good Lord.
Believe it or not, I had a kid in my platoon that I deployed to Afghanistan with that was a reservist going to school at Ohio State. Guess how he was paying for his way through Ohio State?
Are you about to go for a golf scholarship?
Close.
Oh,
He got a scholarship being a golf caddy. So like all the pretentious uber waspy one percenters that like live in Powell and Dublin and all that basically pooled together this like scholarship with like all their extra tax money or whatnot and sent this kid to Ohio State because he was a caddy.
wow.
Yeah. On that note, maybe we should end it. Let me know when you're available again. We'll talk about modern day examples of racism that transcend all ethnicities, and then we'll do the fucking white people.
Fucking white people.
Fucking white people. All right, brother.
Take it easy.
Later. Hey everybody, thanks again for all 5 or 6 of you that watched my videos. Actually, I think I'm averaging close to somewhere between 11 and 15. I'd have to go back and double check. But thanks again for watching. I do apologize if Hugh and I seem to go off on rabbit holes. If you have somebody, whether you yourself or somebody you know, has a difference in opinion, disagrees, and would like to share that and would like to participate, it'd be greatly appreciated, because otherwise this whole concept of we can disagree but still be civil really has no bearing and has no proof unless there is somebody who disagrees on a particular subject and is willing to have a civil conversation about it. So if it's you, if it's somebody you know, we'd appreciate it if you wanted to participate. Other than that, thanks again for watching. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe if you want to, hit the notification bell if you want to, but most importantly, please just leave a comment so we can carry on the conversation.